These guys have done some crazy things, which is the reason they're so feared in the first place. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 most guarded inmates prison guards fear. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's take a look. Number 10, Timothy Joseph McGee. A convicted serial executioner and Toonerville Reefa 13 gang member from the Atwater Village neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. He is alleged to be responsible for at least 12 executions between 1997 and 2001, 3 of which led to convictions. McGee is also suspected of at least 10 attempted executions, 4 of which led to convictions. In 2018, the Los Angeles Times named McGee one of the top 20 most notorious executioners in the history of California, a list that included the likes of Charles Manson, the Golden State Butcher, and the Night Stalker. This guy was definitely placed in a high security prison. They're mostly reserved for the worst of the worst, like multiple slaughterers and escapees. If this guy was on my cell block, I think I'd hide. Number 9, Larry Rains. On May 30th, 1964, Larry, posing as a hitchhiker, was given a lift by 30-year-old Gary Albert Smock, a Plymouth school teacher passing through Kalamazoo. During this trip, Rains brandished a weapon and forced Smock to leave the car and climb into the trunk, where he subsequently locked him in. While continuing the trip, Smock attempted to get out of the car, after which Rains stopped the car, tied him up, and then shot him twice in the back of the head. He then stole $3 and other items of material value before leaving the car on the side of the road, where it was discovered a few hours later by a police officer. Over the next few months, Rains told a number of acquaintances about the execution, due to which he was arrested in the early morning of June 5th, 1964, in front of his friend's house. He offered no resistance during his arrest and readily admitted to removing Smock with incriminating evidence, such as a watch and shoes, later identified as belonging to Smock by relatives and friends. When he was taken to the police station, Rains told police that he had executed 4 others during holdups at various gas stations. He confessed to the May 30th execution of 33-year-old Charles E. Snyder in Elkhart, Indiana, the execution of an Air Force serviceman in Paw Paw, Michigan, the execution of a man in Las Vegas, Nevada, and another man in Kentucky. Number 8, we have Bobby Bostic. Bobby Bostic and his friend saw a few people giving presents to the needy around Christmas time, handing out a Christmas tree and an old couch to those who needed it more. Bobby and his friend ran out of the house where they were at, weapons in hand after inhaling substances, and pointed the weapons at a woman taking the cushions from the couch out of her car. A man yelled at them, and so they turned their attention towards the man, who was the woman's boyfriend. After refusing to give money to the pair, Bobby fired at the man, which grazed him thankfully. He handed them his money and the two ran off to find another victim. They found a woman moving packages out of her car into her house when they put the weapon to her head and told her to give them her keys and get in the car. The pair drove off with the woman and robbed her of her possessions before dropping her off at some random alley. They were both arrested an hour later, and Bobby was sentenced to 241 years after denying several plea deals, which could have reduced his sentence by as much as 211 years. He said that as soon as he heard the judge tell him that he would pass in prison, the gravity of the situation suddenly hit him. Number 7, Alfred George Hines. Hines was an amazing escape artist. He escaped from Nottingham prison after sneaking through the locked doors and over a 20-foot prison wall, for which he became known in the press as Houdini Hines. He worked as a builder-decorator in Ireland and throughout Europe until his arrest by detectives of Scotland Yard in 1956, after 248 days as a fugitive. After his arrest, Hines brought a lawsuit against authorities, charging the prison commissioners with illegal arrest, and used the incident as a means to plan his next escape by having a padlock smuggled into him while he was at the law court. 2 guards escorted him to the toilet, but when they removed his handcuffs, Hines bundled the men into the cubicle and snapped the padlock onto screw eyes that his accomplices had earlier fixed to the door. He escaped into the crowd on Fleet Street, but was captured at an airport 5 hours later. Hines would make his 3rd escape from Chelmsford prison less than a year later. He then returned to Ireland, where he lived for 2 years as a used car salesman under the name William Herbert Bishop, before his arrest after being stopped in an unregistered car. Needless to say, they tightened up security around him after all that. Number 6, Antonio Ferreira. Ferreira, 35, who emigrated to France with his family in the 1980s, was in Fresnes prison in Val-de-Marne, having been jailed for bank robbery. He escaped when a gang set fire to cars in the local area to create a diversion, before raking the guard posts with automatic rifles and smashing down the door and interior walls with rocket launchers. They gave Ferreira explosives that allowed him to blow off the bars of his cell. He had previously arranged to commit a minor act of disobedience so as to be placed in a punishment wing, which was well located for for his escape. It took 3 days of deliberations for the verdict to be announced at the Cour d'Assises de Paris after a 10-week trial. In total, 18 accomplices were sentenced, while 2 suspects were acquitted. Punishments ranged from suspended sentences to a variety of jail terms, including 4 of 15 years each. The men were convicted of crimes including aiding and abetting escape, destroying goods with explosives, burning cars, and transporting weapons. After the escape, security tightened up around them, often monitored almost 24 hours of the day. Number 5, Jason Barnum. The eyeball man, Jason Barnum, was sentenced to 22 years in prison for shooting an Alaska police officer. Barnum's offenses were driven by a serious substance addiction, reports The Independent. What made him seem even more dangerous and intimidating was his tattoo-filled visage. Barnum had one of his eyeballs completely tattooed. The shooting happened when police were investigating home burglaries and car thefts. Officers were inspecting a hotel in 2012 when Barnum opened fire from a bathroom. 2 officers shot back, striking Barnum in the arm, and 1 officer was injured. Barnum later admitted to committing thefts and burglaries to feed a substance addiction. Number 4, Thomas Silverstein. Thomas Edward Silverstein was an American criminal who spent the last 42 years of his life in prison after being convicted of 4 separate executions while in prison for armed robbery, one of which was overturned. Silverstein spent the last 36 years of his life in solitary confinement for executing corrections officer Merle Klutz at the Marion Penitentiary in Illinois. Prison authorities described him as a brutal executioner and a former leader of the Aryan Brotherhood prison gang. Silverstein maintains that the dehumanizing conditions inside the prison system contributed to the 3 executions he committed. He was held in a specially designed cell in what is called Range 13 at ADX Florence Federal Penitentiary in Colorado. He was the longest held prisoner in solitary confinement within the Bureau of Prisons at the time of his passing. Many prison guards refused to talk to Silverstein out of respect for Klutz. Silverstein was known as the most well-guarded prisoner in the US. Number 3, El Chapo. El Chapo, who is wanted in the United States, has always gotten his way. His appetite for freedom has been described in various psychological reports, and his casual manner of bribing officials is legendary. El Chapo is now under a draconian system with continued surveillance, without any blind spots, dogs, reinforced ground, etc., said Alejandro Hope, former Mexican intelligence agency director. But it is evident that he is going to do all he can to undermine those obstacles. In 2001, Guzman escaped from the Puente Grande prison by hiding inside a laundry cart. 62 prison officials who were paid off were charged for helping him escape. He survived on the run for 8 years, living the life of a rich substance kingpin. Number 2, Robert P. Hansen. Robert P. Hansen was an FBI agent for 25 years, from 1976 to 2001. During that time, he sold thousands of classified documents to Soviet and Russian intelligence, pocketing at least $1.4 million by the time he was caught in 2001. Hansen pled guilty to 14 counts of espionage and 1 of conspiracy to commit espionage, and was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms. Hansen's treason was called possibly the worst intelligence disaster in US history by William H. Webster, the chairman of the Commission for the Review of FBI Security Programs. Robert Hansen is currently being held at ADX Florence, where the cells are completely blocked off. Inmates are watched 24/7, and they only get 1 hour out of the cell to work out. At number 1, Michael Swango. Michael Swango was a physician who spent most of the 1980s and 90s using his medical license to poison patients and sometimes colleagues. Despite thoroughly creeping out plenty of people by the time he earned his degree from Southern Illinois University School of Medicine, including being caught faking checkups during OBGYN rotations, Swango secured an internship at what was then known as the Ohio State University Medical Center in 1983. This is where his prolific career as a serial executioner would purportedly begin. It is believed that Swango executed more than 60 people, often by poisoning them with arsenic or intentionally overdosing them with something they were prescribed. Though he could only be charged with 4 executions, Swango was sentenced to life in prison in 2000. He is also spending time at ADX Florence. Talk about a mad doctor, right? Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time on Crime Time.